Ni hao.
Ni hao.
We just finished our amazing travels throughout China and had the opportunity to see so many incredible places.
That's right. We started out in Beijing first, then went to Shanghai.
From Shanghai, we ended up going to Xi'an, where we saw the Terra Cotta Warriors, and then after that, we took a river cruise down the Yangtze River and actually saw the Three Gorges.
That was quite amazing. Then from there, we went to a beautiful town called Yangshuo, and then ended up in Hong Kong as our last stop.
So it was really quite the adventure. And as you can imagine, since we saw so many incredible sights, it's really hard to kind of pick and choose which one we would recommend the most. And after thinking about it, I would have to say, of course, the Great Wall of China is incredible, and of course it is one of those 7 wonders of the world as well. But if I really had to pick somewhere else that maybe people wouldn't know about, I would definitely recommend Yangshuo. In particular, take a cruise down the Li River. It's absolutely breathtaking. In fact, it's filled with all of these limestone mountains that really just are so incredible, you can't even believe it. And the whole area is very peaceful, very serene, and it really gives you a great intake of the culture.
I have to agree, Yangshuo was quite beautiful, especially with those limestone mountains. There were actually 20,000 of these limestone mountains in that region, so that was quite amazing. But for me, if I had to pick 1 or 2 favorites or recommendations, I would definitely visit the Great Wall. I mean, that's just an amazing human accomplishment. It's over 3,000 miles long. So again, for those of you in the US, that's at least from Boston to California. So that's an amazing thing to see. A close second would be the Terra Cotta Warriors, which are just outside of Xi'an. And this is an amazing discovery that a farmer actually dug up in the 1970s. And we actually were able to see this farmer at the site. We didn't meet him, but we were able to see him eating lunch, which was pretty interesting. So those are my 2 favorites, the Great Wall and the Terra Cotta Warriors.
That's great. And throughout our travels too, we had advice about before we visited China, and then we also kind of thought what would be really helpful for people if they were going to travel to China. And I would say, for my golden advice, I would definitely bring toilet paper. The toilets in China, let's just say, are different than what you might expect either back in the States or in perhaps even other countries in the world. But ultimately, the toilets are on the ground, and many of them do not come with toilet paper, so please be prepared for that. And also, the toilet system is such where you can't flush very well. It doesn't work. The septic system doesn't work very well.
Yeah.
So you don't flush the toilet paper down the drain. Rather, you put it in a waste paper basket. So just be aware of that as well. And the smells can get quite pungent.
Yeah, to be honest, I wouldn't even call them toilets. They're just, again, a lot of the public toilets were really just holes in the ground, and for women that's got to be really difficult. For men it's a little easier because we can stand, but just be aware of that, especially for women. My piece of golden advice would be to try to avoid the night trains if you can. We took quite a few of them only because it was in our budget, and if it's in your budget that's great, but if you can avoid them, try to, because it's very loud and difficult to sleep. That's number 1. The second thing is the beds aren't really beds, they're just kind of pieces of wood with a soft mattress on top. And then smoking is allowed on these trains. So if you're trying to sleep and you have nose issues like I do, it's not very fun with the noise, the smells, and then of course the bathrooms are pretty pungent, and those smells can go through the train as well, especially in the middle of the night. So if you can, try to avoid night trains, and maybe fly if it's cheap. That's my piece of golden advice.
All right. And finally, we'd like to take a moment to reflect on how we've grown as a couple and also personally from our experiences in China. And I would think for me, first and foremost, I have a greater appreciation of the freedom that we have in America. China's a communist country, and of course we learn about that in school, we read about it, and we also hear about it, on the news. But again, for me, I don't think I really understood what communism meant until I visited a communist country. And there are a number of reasons about this.
First of all, in China, there is no vote, so you have no say in who the leader is going to be. The second thing is government controls internet access. So for us, that meant no Facebook, no YouTube. All sorts of websites are blocked by the government because they don't want their citizens to have access to it. The third thing is government owns all the land, so there's no private land ownership. And the last thing, or at least one other thing, is there's a one-child law. So if you want to have more than one child, you have to pay the government for it.
So these were all really interesting observations that we noticed. And also I think, again, what was actually quite frightening is that when we were in Tiananmen Square, our guide told us that they don't talk about politics at all in Tiananmen Square. And in fact, it also seemed like there were two locals who were watching and listening in to what our tour guide was saying. And in fact, one of our friends actually asked our guide and said, you know, are those people listening in? And, you know, she kind of gave a nod. So that was a bit
unnerving.
Unnerving, that's a good word for it, to us. And also, you know, I asked our guide to give us a little bit more details about the Tiananmen Square incident that occurred, you know, back in 1989. And I remember, you know, in middle school reading about it and knowing that it was a student uprising that was very bloody and really got a lot of news attention. But when I asked our guide to elaborate on the event, it was almost like, you know, she said, I wasn't born then, I don't remember, I don't know about it. That was her response. And what we also found is that when that particular event is mentioned, oftentimes people act as though it never had happened.
Yeah, and I've done some research just on the side, and there are conflicting reports about how many people died that day, depending on whether the news comes from the Chinese government or whether it comes from other media outlets. So it was really interesting to hear the tour guide kind of sidestep the question as if it never really happened, because, you know, the government controls the media, so they also control what the public sees and has access to.
As well. So I think, again, you know, bottom line, all of our experiences in China really just, again, really opened up our eyes in terms of giving us a better understanding of government in general, but also how appreciative we are of the freedoms that we have in America.
I agree, and you know, if anybody is wondering what it's like to live in a communist country, you know, go visit China. It's a different experience from the U.S., and my guess is you'll have a better appreciation of what you do have in the U.S., especially when it comes to freedoms. So that's my 2 cents.
Well, thanks so much for tuning in.
And stay with us until next time when we visit Thailand.